Happy New Year to all our participants. I'm so pleased to welcome you to our first webinar of 2023 series. My name is Satwinder Paul. I am a teaching professor and program coordinator for the Water and Wastewater Technology program and the co-creator of the Online Help Center with our funding partners. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge that Thompson River University campuses are on the traditional lands of the Tecumlip Swapmek and the Texel within the Swapmek Ulu, the traditional and unceded territory of the Swapmek people. Thompson River University, with their partner, hosts an annual webinar series and courses dedicated to providing relevant technical information, resources, and tools to the small water systems, owners and operators, and Indigenous small water systems on issues of treatment, regulations, operations, maintenance, and water quality monitoring. The Online Help Center strives to assist all small water systems in BC to implement a multi-barrier approach to drinking water in order for systems to consistently provide safe, potable drinking water to their communities in compliance with government regulation. The webinars are scheduled for every 2 months in 2023, and they're offered for free of charge, as well as the courses, and they're EOCP certified for CEUs. So make sure that you attend the complete webinar, and then the EOCP certifications are issued automatically. Today we will have 1 hour presentation from our presenter, Rob Birtles, and then we'll follow that up with a question period. Okay. So today's webinar is Ask the Drinking Water Officer, which focuses on the laws and guidelines that govern small water systems. Particular attention will be focused on the Drinking Water Protection Act and the regulation and the guidelines that promote water potability. So I'm very pleased to welcome Rob Birtles, Environmental Health Officer for Interior Health and our funding partner and the co-creator for the Online Help Center. Rob has been working as an environmental health officer and a delegated drinking water officer for 24 years. As part of his career, Rob has had the opportunity to engage with stakeholders around the province on questions about source water, treatment, regulation, emergency management, and operations. Currently, Rob works with Interior Health, where he supervises a team of drinking water officers who are responsible for the inspection of small water systems in the Interior Health region. So I'd like to turn this over to Rob for his presentation.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here and start the presentation. Satwinder, can I ask you, can you see that presentation right now?
Not yet.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't seem to share my screen here. One moment.
Okay.
I might need some technical help here.
Mike?
Sorry for the delay, everybody. We're having just a technical issue at this point in time. I need to be made, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Now then, how are we doing with that? Can everybody see the screen? Okay, I've got the signal here that people can see me, and I hope that they can see the presentation. Satwinder, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can, Rob.
Excellent, good stuff. All right, so this is a presentation that we've named Ask the Drinking Water Officer. It's basically here so I can answer a few questions and largely tell you what we do as drinking water officers. And as Sat Winter pointed out, I've been working in health protection services for about 24 years in a variety of roles, but the majority of the time I have been working as a drinking water officer. So I am a delegated drinking water officer. And there's a big difference between an appointed drinking water officer and a delegated drinking water officer. I'll get into that later. So I'm going to just move this down and so you can see the entire screen. Let's start the presentation. Okay. So as I pointed out, I'm Rob Brittles. I work with a number of different organizations. Principally, my employer is Interior Health, and Interior Health is one of the health regions in BC. There's 6 active health regions in BC, which represent various geographical areas. Interior Health sits basically within the southeastern part of the province. And it has, well, approximately 2,000 water systems, both large and small. Today's conversation is mainly centered around small water supplies, but some of the stuff we talk about also affects large water supplies. So there I am. In an overview of today's conversation, we're going to talk about why safe drinking water is important, some of the legislation, some of the guidance documents out there, how we go about doing inspections, and then we're going to answer a few questions that you have. Okay. In BC, we have had a bit of a problem. This slide right here shows a retrospective study that was done by a team of epidemiologists. And the team of epidemiologists worked for BC Centre for Disease Control. And what they came up with here is basically a list of outbreaks that have occurred in BC. These outbreaks are all associated with water supplies, and this is only from 1980 to 2000. And what you're going to see here basically is that, yes, indeed, outbreaks do occur in BC, and that sometimes they occur even though we haven't had a lot of human interaction. So you'll see that the suspect sources in a number of these outbreaks are wildlife. These are diseases that are carried, or pathogens that are carried by wildlife and make their way through our water system. This is actually not unusual for pathogens to be in surface water sources in particular. But what we do have basically is water treatment, and water treatment should help with those pathogens. What we see in this particular case, though, with all water supplies, it doesn't matter whether it's in BC, other portions of Canada, or around the world, often what's happening with water supplies is that they have multiple points in which things can go wrong. And in these particular cases, these particular water supplies may have been water supplies that might not have had the appropriate treatment or operations or controls within their system at the time of the outbreak, hence an outbreak occurred. You'll see that in the slide here, we have a number of different types of diseases that were identified for the outbreak. That's down where it says organisms. And you'll also see on that screen where you have laboratory confirmed cases. These are cases in which individuals presented themselves to a physician or to a hospital, and samples were taken and sent off to the lab, and they isolated particular pathogens. Clinical cases are individuals who met what's called a case definition. And then epidemiological cases are your estimates that the epidemiologists have come up with. This is a very interesting one. In Kelowna in 1996, we had a massive outbreak. We only had 177 lab-confirmed cases of cryptosporidium, but we had an estimated 10,000 cases of individuals who were ill. And 1996 is when I started my career, largely in public health, and I do recall following up with a number of these outbreaks. Always very interesting. Now, for waterborne outbreaks, one thing that I do pay attention to here is that what's happening in Interior Health. In that drop-down list, the ones highlighted in green, because I work for Interior Health, I like to know what was happening at that time. The ones highlighted in green are outbreaks that occurred within the boundaries of Interior Health. As you can see, there's a significant number of them. In white are water systems that were outside of interior health that had outbreaks. And then in red is some additional information that I filled in. So some of you may be asking, hey, Rob, what happened since 2000? Well, the Haggensburg outbreak plus 4 other outbreaks have occurred, and those have been with small water supplies. One of our organizations that we have in British Columbia is the BC Centre for Disease Control. They've got a really good website in which you can actually take a look at the incidence of particular diseases that are reportable within BC. So there's a list of diseases that must be reported by labs when they're detected. And those lists actually go into to the epidemiologists who then track basically what's going on with our rates of particular diseases. In this case right here on this slide, we're following giardiasis, also known as beaver fever, and it is largely associated with drinking water systems. In the blue, we see basically that since 2002, the number of cases of giardiasis has actually been dropping. We had a sudden upswing here, but not terribly significant. And we are above the national average, which is in the orange right there. As you can see, the national average has also been dropping. That's a good thing. Cryptosporidium, also known as crypto, is something that we're all very familiar with. And BC, interestingly enough, it's following the national trend for the most part there, but it is slightly below as of 2009. We fell slightly below the national average. Now, cryptosporidium can be associated with drinking water. It can also be associated with some of the occupations like farming, working with animals. That's also what can make a case of cryptosporidium occur there. In every water system that we look at, we like to apply the principles of the multi-barrier approach for safe drinking water. This egg diagram, as we like to call it, is recognized throughout Canada and the US. And it is the key principle we like to use to demonstrate to the public what makes a water system provide the information in the center there, which is the clean, safe, reliable drinking water. And in the red area right there, these are the activities that are occurring or the portions of the water system that are affecting the safety of that water. We today will touch on some of this in the red diagram here. We're going to be talking about some of the legislation, which is out in the gray area here, and some of the guidelines. We won't be touching on some of the research, science, technology out there. And public involvement and awareness, yeah, we will touch on that today, but largely the idea behind the egg diagram is that all of these things within the red portion can actually affect safe drinking water. If you have a breakdown in any one of these portions, hopefully one of these other things can pick up the slack. For instance, if you have a plume of unsafe water coming through your surface water, hopefully water treatment will help address that and minimize the risk. If you have an issue with your water distribution, hopefully there's checks and balances with regards to the construction of your and operation of your water distribution system that will also help provide safe, clean, reliable drinking water. So the multi-barrier approach, as I said, is something that is recognized throughout Canada and the US, and it is a key principle that we use to demonstrate to the public basically what we're talking about when it comes to drinking water. It also shows that largely there's multiple factors at play here when we talk about drinking water. It's not just, say, treatment. There are other factors. Let's move on to the law and policy frameworks for British Columbia. I can't really speak to other provinces. British Columbia is where I work, and it's what I know essentially throughout my work here. Now, in the framework for law and policy framework, again, we're working with the egg diagram here. This is the multi-barrier approach, and the multi-barrier approach plays a key factor in how drinking water is largely viewed in BC. So water legislation in BC is known to be complex. As you can see, we have a number of different forms of legislation that can affect how water systems are governed. what regulates them essentially. And what we have here is there's regulations at the municipal, under municipal government. Those might be stormwater outflow guidelines, policies, or bylaws. We have also the provincial framework, and that's largely where I work, is at the provincial framework. And for drinking water officers, it's the Drinking Water Protection Act. But there are other acts that can affect the delivery of water. The Environmental Management Act, this has a lot to do with pollution. And then the Water Sustainability Act, which is newer legislation. It took over for the Water Act. And this is your water license or your well license. And it also is with regards to the quantity of water. It does touch a little bit on quality, but mostly it's quantity. And then, of course, there in the dark blue here, we have areas where this is largely where our partners from the federal government get involved. And they get involved basically when we have transboundaries waters or waters that go between provinces, or for our national or federal sites. That's when the federal government is largely involved. Federal government is also involved in the creation of some of the national guidelines, like the guidelines for drinking water quality. The legislation in BC that is used by drinking water officers is all published online. If you were to type into the internet BC laws, one of the first Google searches you're going to get is all the laws in BC. So if anybody's curious about those laws, you can go in and you end up going into taking a look at the legislation. And for water suppliers, if they want to know basically, what the Water Act says or the Water Sustainability Act, they can search that. If they would like to know what some of the legislation that we use as drinking water officers, we'll help you find that legislation if you can't find it. But also, you can look it up yourself if you like. There's a lot of good resources that BC government has online for water suppliers. Principal legislation that drinking water officers use is the Public Health Act. Public Health Act actually has a number of different components in it that help address some of the things that, some of the tools that drinking water officers need. For instance, the right to inspect is found in the Public Health Act. This allows us to go and inspect water supplies. Within the Public Health Act, though, there is what's called the the Health Hazard Regulation. And if you've ever had an assessment done on your well, they may be looking at setbacks. I'll talk about those later on, but those setbacks largely are found within the health hazard regulation right here. The Drinking Water Protection Act speaks directly to drinking water, and it provides basically the powers of the drinking water officer, but it also carries with it a number of pieces of legislation which follow a number of components of the multi-barrier approach. Also underneath that, of course, a regulation found underneath the Act is the Drinking Water Protection Regulation, which is a little bit more specific than the Act. When you get a regulation, it's very specific. So the Drinking Water Protection Act, I just wanted to bring up a few key principles, and I'm not going to talk about the entire Act, but the key principles are that the Act recognizes that water potability, the safe delivery of water, water that is reliable and drinkable, is a public health issue in British Columbia. It's not unlike most other legislation in most other provinces or territories. All of them have legislation which speaks to water potability. It recognizes as one of its key components that safe drinking water is an integrated approach. Going back to the multi-barrier approach, it is essentially recognizing the multi-barrier approach is at play here with water supplies and the safe delivery of water. It also recognizes that proper treatment and distribution are very important. Section 6 of the Drinking Water Protection Act states that you must provide potable water if you're a water supplier. And it also recognizes that monitoring of water is very important, and that the water needs to meet acceptable standards. Those are the key principles around the, or within the, built within the Drinking Water Protection Act. So the Drinking Water Protection Act, just to get a little bit more specific, some of you are asking, am I a water supplier? Well, I hope if you've taken part of this call, you've already recognized the fact that you most likely are a water supplier. But in BC, the Drink Water Protection Act states that 2 or more connections or a business on their own water source, in other words, you're not supplied by another water supplier, you require a permit. In other words, you are a water supplier. Where the Drink Water Protection Act may not apply is for single-family dwellings. These are homes that have their own well or their own surface intake. No permit is required. They're considered to be a domestic system, but they do not meet the parameters or definition of a water supplier under the Act. So if you're a water supplier and you require a permit, the best thing to do is contact a local drink water officer and ask, how do I get a permit? If you've already got a permit, but you want to talk about the key legislation that affects your water system, there may be permit conditions associated with your permit. It's best to get in touch with your drinking water officer to ask about those specific conditions. Now, the Drink Water Protection Act also carries within it legislation, and I've just brought up a few pieces of the legislation. It's a lengthy act, but a few pieces of the legislation are: you must provide potable water. It sounds like a common sense approach, but having said that, some water suppliers still don't provide potable water in BC. That is a reality within BC. They need to be working towards that, but we do have small water systems out there that aren't providing potable water. They're most likely on some form of advisory. We'll talk about those later on. And every water supplier in BC, whether you're large or small, you must have an emergency response and contingency plan. These plans are becoming a bigger factor in BC, largely because of the number of large-scale emergencies we've had in the last few years. We've been through fires, we've been through floods, and we've been through a pandemic. And but it's not to say that these events won't occur in the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about emergency response and contingency plans later on, but just know that you must have one. And you may be directed to update your plan as well and submit it for review to the drink water officer. Really what the drinking water officer wants to know is do you have a plan? Who's identified as the lead individuals within the plan, and what are you going to do if something goes wrong? Also within BC, and this does apply to small water suppliers, is that if you make any change to your works, and works is treatment, distribution, anything connected to your water supply, you really should be speaking to a drink water officer with regards to a construction permit. Construction permits are required under Section 7 of the Drink Water Protection Act. And we do see this quite often during inspection where water suppliers have made changes to their water system. And the reality is that a construction permit was required. You might be required to actually get a qualified professional to assess the system and present as-built documents. So ask the question first before you dig. It's kind of like that know before you dig. Monitoring. In the Act, monitoring is required. And monitoring, typically what it looks like is bacteriological monitoring. So these are water samples. And water samples in the Act, a little bit more specific. It says you have to monitor your water, but it also tells you how often you have to monitor your water unless told to do otherwise by the drink water officer. And typically in Canada, 4 samples per month would be appropriate for a small water supplier. I would recommend, though, that if you don't have one, you develop a monitoring plan. It's pretty obvious that water suppliers can't be there 24/7. They may need somebody to stand in for them, and that person might be somebody who's actually doing water sampling. So develop a plan. Where are you going to sample? How are you going to sample? And who do you submit that sample to? Most health authorities in BC will cover the costs of analysis of that sample, which is a good thing. It can be expensive. And water suppliers, if they don't already know this, unless specified by the drink water officer, they should be submitting 4 samples per month. That's basically 1 a week. Going 30 days between samples is a long period of time to know whether your water is safe or not. So shorten that time period. It does reduce the risk within your system. Another part of the Act that you should know about is that as a water supplier, you must notify the public when there is an issue that requires a notification. And the other part of it is that you also have to notify your drinking water officer. Best plan is if something's going wrong with your water system, you get a bad sample result, you have a breakdown in your system, give your drinking water officer a call and ask, what do I do? And they will provide some direction to you. From there, though, you have to notify the public. And of course, being a long document, the Act actually does specify a number of other things around public safety, around largely around the multi-barrier approach there. Things like source water protection planning and other components like tampering within water systems. Those are very specific laws. And but these are the main principal ones that we want to talk about. There is the top 5 up there. Now, water potability is not something that is actually actively described well within the Act. However, water potability is well known to be water that is safe to drink, low risk of exposure to contaminants. How do you decide on that? Well, we have another document that I'll talk about later on. It's called the Guidelines for Canadian Drinking Water Quality. This is a national document which says if you meet this, all the parameters in this document, basically your water is safe to drink. So you're under all those maximum acceptable concentrations and you don't have a bacteriological issue, you should be safe to drink. That's largely what water potability means. It needs no further treatment. Construction. I did talk a little bit about construction earlier, and I've provided a couple of tips there for construction. If you're doing construction, make sure you have a construction permit. Give yourself some time to get that construction permit because you will have to submit documents. The other thing is depending upon the scale of your project, you may be directed to engage a qualified professional. Sometimes those are engineers, other times they're design professionals, qualified designers. It depends on the scale of the project, but do talk to a drinking water officer or what's called an issuing official. An issuing official is an engineer, public health engineer who works for the health authorities, and they can be very helpful in determining whether a construction permit would be required prior to approvals. And one other tip there is that if you do have a major emergency with your water system, you don't require a permit, but they will require you to submit the documents like what did you put in the ground for the repair of your distribution, or did you replace like for like equipment? And that's the kind of information that would be required. So we don't want to see water systems progress to falling apart so they can avoid a construction permit process. But at the same time, it is understood that water mains do break and incidences and accidents do occur. In this particular case, this was an emergency event and they had a large rainstorm event which excavated out the road and then required new distribution mains to be put in. They would not have required a construction permit for that, but we would have required a detailed list of the materials that they used. We want to make sure that the materials used are for potable purposes. Okay, water monitoring. Now, water monitoring is both chemical, bacteriological, and physical monitoring of your system. For most water suppliers that are small, you are largely depending upon your bacteriological analysis. And the bacteriological analysis, I've taken a snippet here of what the Guidelines for Canadian Drinking Water Quality says, and I did not take a snippet of our regulation. Our regulation would stipulate that you need to take 4 samples per month. In this particular case, populations up to 5,000 people, the minimum requirement is 4 samples per month. Remember, that's a minimum requirement. And while some water suppliers who are in isolated regions may actually be sampling less, they may be relying on other forms of monitoring. With water supplies, there are other forms of monitoring, which could be things like, are you measuring your chlorine levels? What is your pressure differentials across a filter? Other forms like that. The systems may also have alarms associated with them, like with UV systems. So these are all come into what's called a monitoring plan, and monitoring plans are very important. As I pointed out earlier, it's pretty much impossible for a water operator to be in attendance to a water system, 7 days a week. It's great to have a day off. You may need a replacement person. This person should be familiar with the document that you have written called a monitoring plan. If you don't know how to make a monitoring plan or draft a monitoring plan, talk to your drinking water officer or go to the online health center, and there are courses you can take which will help you develop a plan. Oops. Notifying the public. One of the key principles with unsafe water is that you have to notify the public. There's various ways for small water suppliers to notify the public. You might use an online method. In other words, you have an email address which you can send out an automated email with instructions for the public. That would be acceptable. You'll see a few different examples right here. For instance, a boil water advisory put on a sandwich board at the very entrance to a community. That is one way of notifying the public. You could use, as I said, the internet. You might be posting a notification in the most prominent area. But really, what are those advisories or notifications? There are different levels of notifications and they're used for different purposes. So we'll talk about a few of them here. Water quality advisory. A water quality advisory is used when you have an issue that may affect a specific portion of your population, like the elderly or immunocompromised. And that might be a precautionary statement. If you have, let's pretend your drinking water officer has informed you that it's appropriate to put on a water quality advisory because you have some low total coliforms and they're a little unsure as to what's going on with your system, they may instruct you to put on a water quality advisory. At other times, water quality advisories are used to share information and provide a cautionary statement for some of the metals that you find in well systems like uranium or arsenic. A water quality advisory is appropriate because a boil water advisory will not address that metal. Boil water advisories. Boil water advisories are used when we believe there's a higher risk for pathogens being in the system. And so it's a cautionary statement again. And a boil water advisory in BC typically involves boiling the water for 1 minute. But people will have additional questions, and this is where you can provide additional information. Their usual questions are, can they shower in it? The answer is yes. It's really water that's going to be consumed in any form. So it might be making ice, it might be washing fresh fruits and vegetables, it might be making baby or infant formula. All of those things would require the individual to boil their water prior to using it. Another level beyond that is a do not consume notice. This is when the risk is increased for the system. And do not consume is exactly what it states. Don't consume the water. So you can't use it for toothbrushing. You could not use it for fresh fruits and vegetables, and you can't use it for any other form of water consumption. You still could use it for hand washing, and most likely could use it for showering. And then there's the do not use, which is largely the last advisory on the list, and it's the one that is rarely used within our province. It is also used only when the water has such a large issue, the risk is so high that you can't wash your hands in it, you can't basically shower in it or bathe in it because you couldn't immerse your body in it. So those are the various advisories. If indeed any member of the public wants an interpretation of what that is, you can tell them what your interpretation is, but there's actually a website that Interior Health runs. It's for water systems within Interior Health, and I've taken a screenshot. It's called Drinking Water for Everyone. So you can go to the Drinking Water for Everyone website. If you are within Interior Health, click on your water system. In this particular case, you got a little kettle right there, and that's a boil water advisory. They can click on that, and not only do they get some written information on boil water advisories, but there's also a little video done by one of our medical health officers on what a boil water advisory is. Water quality advisory is in purple, and they get a description of what a water quality advisory is. Now, I wanted to mention another piece of legislation which drinking water officers use frequently. And this legislation is in relation to setbacks for wells. It's an interesting piece of legislation. It is very old. It came from what was the sanitary regs prior to the health hazard regulation being brought into effect. And it's your setbacks. Now, these setbacks are basically broad assumptions, but they are very, very helpful. So for wells, and your well driller will help you out with this as well, by the way, but if you have a well within 30 meters of a probable source of contamination, let's pretend it's a septic system, you most likely have a problem. You're no longer meeting the health hazard regulation. And these setbacks are used in what's called a groundwater at risk of pathogens report when a drinking water officer does an inspection. And it does occur where these setbacks aren't met. Sometimes we have wells that are being converted from irrigation wells, which don't have setbacks, to potable water sources. And in that conversion, people want to use it as a potable water source. The assessment would indicate as to whether you're meeting setbacks or not. If you're not meeting setbacks, you need to discuss with your drinking water officer what the appropriate action would be. It might be drilling a new well or finding a new source. It might be having a hydrogeological report, which would indicate that there's no connectivity between the activity and your well. 120 meters from cemeteries and dumping grounds. So it's interesting. Now, we're coming down to guidelines, standards, and objectives. So guidelines, standards, and objectives are basically the guidance documents which guide our daily work routine and activity. These documents are all shared online, and so you can look them up yourself. And basically what they do is they provide some assessment tools for drinking water officers and for other individuals, including the qualified professionals out there. And basically it provides more information as to what we need to look at. In the case of some of the guidelines there, I brought up here a couple different guidelines. One is the guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality. That's a guideline around maximum acceptable concentration for physical parameters, for some of your chemicals, and for your bacteriological guidelines there. This guideline is something that's agreed upon by the provinces, and it goes under review by professionals out there, and it is something that we use across the country. Interestingly enough, sometimes this guideline will be reviewed in other countries, and they may adopt this specific guideline based on the scientific evidence that's provided. Over here, I did talk about wells and setbacks. This would be a guideline right here for what we like to call GARP wells. This is groundwater at risk of containing pathogens. This is for your wells that basically, this is an older version, of course. You want to use the September 2017 version if you wanted to take a look at this document. It is online. But what this document does is it helps in the assessment of groundwater supplies to make a determination as to what the likelihood, or the risk, I should say, is of a well actually being contaminated by pathogens. And in this document, it's what the drinking water officers do is they use this as a screening tool. Just a tip there for all of you. The drinking water officer will let you know, based on the screening tool, whether your well is GARP. In other words, it could actually contain pathogens. And get them to provide the full report to you. You have two choices at this point. You can plan for treatment, or you can move on to another level of assessment involving a qualified professional. And the qualified professional, their first step here is to also go through the screening tool, but they have some additional tools they can use to determine what the risk is for your system. It can be an expensive process though. So sometimes you probably may want to actually look at treatment for some of these wells, particularly the shallow ones. Surface water guidance. A number of water supplies in BC use surface water. And surface water, of course, is subject to sudden change. And it also is subject to carrying a number of different microorganisms, including pathogens. There are treatment targets built within these objectives. These objectives are published by the government of BC and specifically the Ministry of Health. You can look it up online. But in taking a look at these things, I've just basically pulled out a bit of a snippet here for you. And these are the treatment targets right here. And so treatment targets are, they're looking to inactivate viruses, 99.99% of viruses. They're also looking to inactivate cysts. And the national standard is 2 sources of treatment. Okay, so that might be physical removal like filtration. And it might also mean disinfection. So disinfection is inactivation. For your surface sources, you're looking at less than 1 into use for turbidity. And of course, in your monitoring, you always want to see that 0 E. coli. E. coli is not just a pathogen, but it's actually more so associated as an indicator organism. It's an indicator of fecal contamination within your system. If you can meet these targets within your system, then chances are you're meeting this objective right here, this guideline. We talked a little bit about groundwater at risk of pathogens. For anybody wanting to reference this document, here's the document right here. It's version 3, it's 2017, September. And it is used, as I pointed out earlier, to assess the risk that pathogens could at any time enter your system. Largely, it's the connectivity to sources of contamination, including surface water. Drink water officers use it as a screening tool. They'll take a look at your water monitoring results. So they'll take a look at your history of water monitoring. They'll take a look at your well location. They'll also take a look at its construction, the aquifer type, in other words, how vulnerable is the aquifer, and largely where does the well sit in relation to everything around it, hazards that have been identified around it. And it's just as a screening tool. At Interior Health, we provide a letter which identifies, hey, this is where we have concerns over what your, basically what your well construction is or your monitoring results. And we may tell you this well is GARP, groundwater at risk of pathogens, and here's your choice. And if you want to proceed with treatment, this is how we can help. If you want to proceed with hydrogeologist, this is how we can help. So coming down to it, let's talk a bit about inspections there. Inspections actually really occur in 3 different forms. There's what's called the routine inspection. Your routine inspection is something that is scheduled. And at Interior Health, we schedule routine inspections all the time for water suppliers. How you end up on a list of for routine inspection could be based on your risk. It might be based largely upon the fact that you haven't had a routine inspection recently. Or there may be targeted inspections for specific types of water supplies because we need more data. Now, in a routine inspection, a drinking water officer will do a source review. We talked about a GARP screening. They may do a GARP screening if you have a well. They might take a look at your water source and take a look at some of the hazards associated with your surface water source. They'll do a treatment review. This is a physical review. They'll go into your treatment room and see what kind of treatment you have, see whether any modifications have occurred to the treatment since the construction permit was issued, and largely review with you how your treatment is operating and whether you've had any issues. They'll take a look at your monitoring history. They may themselves also take samples as audit samples and report those samples back to you with the routine inspection report. They'll review your emergency response contingency plan, also known as ERCP, and they'll take a look at your compliance under the Drinking Water Protection Act. Areas where there's non-compliance, they may utilize forms of what's called progressive enforcement, which usually occurs that they'll let you know first off that, hey, you haven't met your compliance and here's a new compliance date. They could apply conditions on permit and then apply a compliance date with that. If you don't meet the compliance date, then basically you're no longer meeting the terms of your permit and they could advance to an order. Having said that, just work with the drinking water officers about the compliance, and the drinking water officers can be very helpful in helping you with your compliance. Another form of inspection is complaint. Complaints, we do get complaints from the public frequently. And drinking water officers will actually listen to the complaint and determine as to whether, first off, we have any mandate. If we had a complaint about from a resident that there's no second egress to a local community, which it falls within the boundaries of a water system, we'll say we have no mandate. But if it is indeed a complaint that's associated with water quality that needs to be followed up on, then they will have an inspection of the system and determine as to whether the complaint is valid and what corrective actions need to be taken to address the complaint. Complaints are a little bit different than investigations. Investigations are mandated under Section 29 of the Drinking Water Protection Act, and this is a formal process. In that process, the complainant will provide a written document with the information regarding their complaint and the reason for their request for investigation. They will also provide any evidence that they may have within the written document. The drinking water officer will take a look and review this information and determine as to whether we have a mandate and an investigation is necessary, or whether we don't have a mandate and no investigation is necessary. Either way, the drinking water officer will respond in writing to the complainant and will also notify the drinking water supplier that they have received a request for an investigation and whether they will be proceeding with an investigation or not. Should an investigation occur, the drinking water officer will do a file review, conduct a file review, and also will conduct interviews and go on site and provide a complete report. Investigations are relatively exhaustive processes and do require a lot of personnel time in order to complete, but they do occur. If anyone is thinking of requesting an investigation, again, BC government has been very helpful and has provided the documents that you can fill out to ask for an investigation. If you can't find those documents or you don't know how to fill out that documentation, again, talk to your drinking water officer and they can be helpful. We're going to touch on water sources here. Now, water sources, there are a number of different water sources out there, and I chose these pictures on purpose. When we review water sources there, we actually can see a number of different things. And each one of these pictures here shows something that would largely, we'd have to ask a lot more questions. For instance, an improperly constructed well, a well right next to a lake, a debris flow, and an intake. You see a kink in the hose here. It's not going to last through the next flood. So we have a lot of questions that we're going to ask and provide some recommendations back to you with regards to the intake. For water sources, surface sources, as I pointed out, typical issues are your pathogens. Turbidity can be an issue for many water sources that are surface sources in British Columbia. And water quantity can be variable. Surprisingly, people on the east coast of Vancouver Island have had droughts, and some of their water systems are sensitive to water flows, even though Vancouver Island is known to be a rainy environment. It is the same with much of British Columbia. Your current water sources largely depend on either withholding water in a reservoir, upland reservoir, or if they're dependent upon a creek, you may end up in periods of drought where the creek is dry. So you need to plan for those shortages. And in planning for those shortages, you might write that up in your emergency response plan, what to do if you run out of water. Or you might engage with other water suppliers and come up with joint plans on how you're going to address your shortages. You might, for shorter times of loss of water source, let's pretend a pump is down, you may have reservoirs in your system that you can last just a little bit longer without having to call an advisory. Again, you had to treat for pathogens for all surface sources. Groundwater typical issues. We have pathogens can be an issue for some groundwater supplies if they're considered to be GARP. Metals. Typical metals we see in BC are arsenic, uranium, selenium, and manganese. We do see fluoride. And there are other metals we need to pay attention to, but those are the typical culprits. Strangely enough, water quantity can be variable in some wells. It really depends upon the aquifer. Some aquifers are vulnerable, and some aquifers actually do have a large withdrawal from them. And so they're having trouble making up the water. And this is a real issue for many water suppliers around the province. Okay. Coming into centralized treatment here, this is a typical treatment setup that we see for a lot of different water suppliers. Step-down filters, UV unit, followed by chlorination. This is a centralized water treatment system. So this water treatment system sits in a very small building. All the plumbing sits within the building. The water supplier has complete control over what's going on with this treatment. It's hands off for the public. Just the water supplier and their operator can service this equipment here. And this is what we would typically see for systems that have pathogen control. This is not a system that we might see for most metals and other parameters that we may see for having issues. This is a basic system. And the systems like this, they do meet often meet the surface water treatment objectives, in that you have filters, UV, and of course, this is what is actually providing, the chlorine is actually what's providing your virus control. So with contact time, you should be getting a 4 log reduction. the UV unit plus the filters is providing your cyst control and much of your bacteriological control. Centralized treatment. Centralized treatment is also becoming more complicated in British Columbia. Here we have a snapshot of a system that is a small water system. This is actually a seasonal system that draws water off of a well, and they sought a construction permit and got a construction permit for nanofiltration. So this is a nanofiltration system. It also has pre-filters, UV, nanofiltration, chlorination, summer and winter tanks. It is an advanced system. More complicated to operate, but at the same time, from a treatment perspective, providing their distribution is in good shape. It should provide good quality water from now until the time the system needs to be replaced. Many people have questions about point of entry and point of use. So I'm going to discuss point of entry, point of use. Just to be clear on the terms here, point of entry is a device that is largely servicing a single residence or a single business. They're lower flow devices than your centralized treatment. And a point of entry is basically is as water enters a home. Let's call it that. It's treating the water for all the taps within the home. Point of use is largely under the sink treatment units. And these treatments are used in some scenarios, often installed by homeowners on their own, not often supplied by water suppliers. There's a few considerations with point of entry, point of use. Remember that the water supplier still has a responsibility to provide potable water. But what this is doing with the allowance of point of entry, point of use systems is that instead of the potability at the start of the system, it's actually at the end of the system. And but there's a few other considerations here. 100% of your clientele has to have the POE unit and allow active access for maintenance of that POE unit. If individuals do not allow access, you may be told you have to go to centralized treatment. Entrance agreements are a good idea. And for the maintenance for all POE, POU units, construction permits are also necessary. You can't just put this stuff in as a water supplier to a home and say good enough. You must have a construction permit. There may be additional monitoring requirements for these systems, checking of pressure differentials across filters, bacteriological monitoring, or monitoring if you're trying to reduce metals, monitoring of the specific metal to ensure that the system is operating correctly. The frequency of that monitoring is something that you should discuss with your drink water officer. Just to note though, that even if you do have POE or POU units, all other sections of the Drink Water the Drink Water Protection Act still apply. And that application is that you still must meet your conditions on permit and other forms, like you still must have an emergency response plan. So again, bring it up with the Drink Water officer. Now, one of the considerations here is that it's the what now, and I'm getting a notification we have 4 minutes left, so I better speed up. So these are all emergency events. Emergency events in BC are actually occurring more frequently. Public health is heavily engaged in emergency events. I spend much of my year helping water suppliers during emergency events. Algal blooms are becoming a bigger issue, as are large rainstorm events, as in this one, and also wildfires are also becoming a big issue. So with emergency response and contingency planning, it's a must under the Act. There is a guidance document that province of BC has published. If you don't know how to create your own emergency response plan, please go to the online help center and take a course. It's free and provided by drinking water officers. This will help you meet the regulation, but also get a emergency response plan that works for you. And then water distribution, just wanted to let you know that water distribution is another consideration that we will take a look at. All the pipes are underground, but the construction permits tell us what the materials are. And also you need some planning around water storage. We will inspect that. And also if you're having a number of water main breaks, you may be asked for an assessment by a qualified professional. This could be pressure testing. There's a few challenges and solutions. This is what I see out there on the landscape with water suppliers. Very few trained operators. Many water suppliers are volunteers. poor financial planning. I hate to say it, but a lot of water suppliers are not planning for replacement of existing assets that they have with their system. They've not actually assessed those assets. So you need to plan for the future for replacement. Poor treatment is a reality in British Columbia. Governance. There's been a number of works that have indicated that the larger your system, the better off it is, the more sustainable it is. But the reality is that in order to gain grants, your system ultimately there should have the involvement of local government, either in management of the system or in support of the system. And then small systems are very vulnerable to climate change. Drought, fire, and flash flood, they generally are not robust. And that is a problem. So when your intake gets blown out by a large rainstorm event, most water suppliers don't have a second intake or are not connected to another system or even have mutual aid agreements with the water suppliers for help. And then another component of this is that many source hazards are unknown. And I encourage water suppliers to both monitor their water sources and also get familiar with some of the hazards that occur. If you want to know what those hazards look like, talk to your drinking water officer, or there's a document under Source Water at the Online Help Center, which will help you assess your source. Okay, and last but not least, there is a survey. The Online Help Center needs your help. They want to know, what do you need to know? What do you need to learn? What would be helpful for you? So please take the survey. We do listen to the survey. I take part in this, and we try and tailor both the webinars, some of the courses, and the materials on the website towards what your needs are. And now I'm going to leave it open to questions.
Thank you, Rob, for that excellent presentation. And now we will take questions for the next half an hour. Well, why don't I start with a question while everybody's typing theirs in the chat? Rob, you talked about water monitoring in the distribution system and about total coliform, but what about E. coli and fecal coliform testing? Are we only required to do total coliform? That's my question.
No, actually, a standard bacteriological analysis will take a look at two forms of indicator organisms. One is total coliform. So this is vegetative organisms plus E. coli. And then there is specific E. coli. E. coli is a form of fecal contamination. And all labs that are what are called accredited labs will do both analysis. So you will get a readout from your test that shows the number of total coliforms and the number of E. coli. By the way, if you have greater than 10 total coliforms, or you have greater than 1 E. coli count, that is going to create an immediate response from the lab. The lab will contact the drinking water officer immediately, who will contact the water supplier immediately.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from one of our participants. Her name is Juliet. At what point would a small water system operator be required to assess their compliance with Canadian drinking water guidelines beyond the routine monitoring parameters, example, pesticides and other chemical contaminants? And is there anything on the horizon that small water system operators should be looking out for navigating the frequent updates to the guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality? Is this changing with increasing frequency of emergencies?
Yeah, unfortunately, the question broke up a little bit when you were reading it there, Satwinder, but I'll answer the question as I heard it. And if I don't have it right, please, Juliet. Write us in again, but or I can provide a written response for you. But the water suppliers often have to take chemical samples, and those chemical samples will do a comparison with maximum acceptable concentrations. And if you have something that is approaching a maximum acceptable concentration chemical, or your parameters are above the maximum acceptable concentration, this will usually prompt two responses. One is a file review to determine as to whether past chemical samples have been of the same nature or similar level. If they are, the water supplier should actually really start taking a look at treatment within the system or an alternate source. That is a reality behind some of the chemicals we see in BC. There are chemicals that those values do sometimes change within the guidelines based on the latest science. Selenium. Selenium might be an issue that you'll see. And in BC, we follow what's called a BC guideline for selenium because that was work done by a BC toxicologist. But the guidelines have actually increased for across Canada, and that's largely associated with diet. When it comes to emerging contaminants, yeah, emerging contaminants are something that are not often looked at by drinking water officers unless there is a specific issue. For instance, if your water source is next to, let's say, a battery storage facility, they may actually take a look at lithium. Lithium is not something that is within the guidelines, but there are known values for safety of consumption of lithium.
Rob, our next question is from Keith. Are there funding options for private utilities?
I will just be very straight up, typically not from government. I say typically. It really depends upon the issue at hand. So there are a couple different funds that municipal systems draw from. One of them is the Building Canada Fund, and other ones might be gas tax funding. Now, as a private utility, one thing you may want to do is talk to your local government representative. This would be your area director. Your area director can direct gas tax funding to your project, but you will need a good understanding of the scope of your project. You may need some qualified professionals to help you for what I like to call shelf-ready plans. There are other initiatives out there, though, that do actually provide some funding for utilities, and those might be with regards to source protection, source protection planning. And some of those initiatives are really interesting. Usually you'll need to take a look at who in your local area is working on source water. So the water board actually is quality and quantity for water sources. In the Okanagan, they'll provide up to $30,000 funding, providing you have support from local government. In other words, that grant application has been advanced through local government, and local government says, yeah, this is one of our utilities, and this is the issue that they're having, and they want to do an assessment on their source. They might, the Okanagan Basin Water Board might actually pay for that. In the Kootenay region, that could be something that comes through Columbia Basin Trust. Other regions, again, just start taking a look around at what grant funding opportunities there are, but don't pass up partnerships. That's another way of looking at grant funding. So where there is a partnership who could apply for a grant, you might still benefit from the work that's done around that grant. I work a lot in source water protection, so I'm very familiar with the source water protection grants. When it comes to straight infrastructure, though, often it's for utilities, it's actually appropriate financial planning. And when it comes to grants for those utilities, really, again, work with your local government to see whether there's any grants that you might be able to partner on. Water conservation grants is something that you may see coming down the line. This may actually help you improve your distribution system.
Rob, for some reason, your internet connection is not the best. So please bear with us to all our participants, and we will try to address all the questions. Okay, next question is from Cooper. Are there any guidelines for water quality for use for growing vegetables? Would the quality vary depending on the type of vegetables grown? What about for irrigation?
Okay. Cooper, in reality, I don't deal with irrigation. Irrigation is for water quality is something that you'd want to talk to Ministry of Agriculture about in British Columbia, or talk to somebody from environmental farm planning who could help you. There may be an organization that could help you, like for the wine growers, there's the Vintners Association. For the orchardists, there's the BC Fruit Tree Growers Association. Talk to those organizations. When it comes to water quality for irrigation, Often there is not a formal standard around some of the things that I would look at for potable water, but you want things like reduced turbidity because you don't want to plug your irrigation system. There are some chemical contaminants that you will be given notifications about as a water supplier who's providing irrigation water. Things like fuels. You don't want fuels to go through your water system. That comes through Emergency Management BC. So when a fuel truck spills into a river, it will provide a notification to individuals who have an intake on a river or in a lake in the area that is affected.
Next question is from Sam. Under contract operations, does emergency response and contingency planning normally go to the system owner or contract operator?
Really good question, actually. So it's the owner who's actually responsible for having the emergency response plan. The emergency response plan could name the contract operator as the principal individual who exercises the emergency response plan and actually potentially assesses the system or notifies the owner of any hazards associated with the system. So it's a little bit of two forms there. The owner is responsible for having the emergency response plan. The contract operator is responsible for exercising the emergency response plan.
Next question is from Derek. What is required to obtain operator license, meaning operator certification, Rob?
Depends on the level of certification you're looking for. So as a small water supplier, the requirements would be that you have to take a small water supplier course. The Online Help Center actually can help you out with that. TRU offers a course for safe drinking water. There are other courses available. You need experience with a water system. So it's 50 hours of experience, I understand. And then of course you must take an exam with the EOCP. If you want to know a little bit about the exam itself, talk to EOCP and they can tell you, whether it's multiple choice, which it is, but they can also tell you when you can write an exam and as to whether you have the credentials to write an exam. If you're looking to become a level 1 water system operator or a level 2, level 3, level 4, it's best to talk to EOCP about what you need in order to do that, because there are specific hours associated with it as well as training.
Next question, Ron asks, why would a small water operator want to offer both point of entry water and potable water from source?
Really good question. It really doesn't happen that often. So cases where you may want to offer it are cases whereby which you have a surface source which has both chemical issues, in other words, they're above a maximum acceptable concentration, and of course you have to treat for pathogens. Ideally, you want centralized treatment. That way you have complete control of the water quality that is entering homes. You don't have to enter into home agreements, and you don't have to service individual units. Servicing individual units can be very costly depending upon your water quality that gets to those units. So central is best. But there are cases where sometimes with some small water suppliers, they will elect to use point of entry. So they'll fill out their application for a construction permit and then enter into that conversation with the drink water officer as to what the responsibilities are. It really depends upon the parameter. I usually lean towards centralized treatment only because it's what I call a form of passive public health. In other words, it's being taken care of for the public by the water supplier instead of the public having to depend upon a water supplier coming to their home.
Next question is from Sean. Do you know if the heterotrophic plate count has food for iron-reducing bacteria? In other words, can a background colony on a plate count indicate IRB, or is it excluded?
Good question there, Sean. I don't know. You got me there. You know what I would do is, with regards to that, is contact one of the accredited labs and just talk to some of the lab personnel with regards to the heterotrophs and maybe even with regards to your specific sample. And that could be helpful. Iron-reducing bacteria are problematic in many systems within BC. This can be an issue, particularly for your hot water tanks and other forms of plumbing. But ultimately there, get a sample done, send it to the lab, and talk to the lab with regards to what they're seeing in your water sample, with regards to heterotrophic plate counts and its interaction with other bacteria.
We don't seem to be having any more questions. Hopefully they'll come up again. I just wanted to remind the participants that they can register for emergency response and contingency planning courses and the water monitoring course on the website. They're offered for free. And yeah, we have more questions coming. So same question from Cassie about the, for some reason we're getting the same questions being added into the chat. Oh, okay. It's the same question again, Natasha. It's about the heterotrophic. Okay, sorry, we're just having trouble briefly. Other questions are coming.
Minor technical issues, yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay. So okay, this is just somebody thanking us for the wonderful webinar. Okay. Oh, okay. Next question from Milo. Is there a set requirement to do door-to-door notices for boil water advisory, or is email and website notices sufficient?
Yeah, Milo, it's a really good question that you have there. The way a water supplier notifies the public is largely unique to the water supplier. Talk to your drink water officer, but coming down to it, look, as a small water supplier, is it feasible for you to go door to door? Door to door is always the best form of notification, but there are other forms. You could use a phone tree or a phone system. There are automated phone systems out there these days. You could use email, or you could post sandwich boards. Ultimately, though, you really do want to get the message out. So I do actively encourage the water suppliers to use door-to-door, but it is not the only form. It is not something that's actually prescribed in the legislation, but it is the best form of notification.
Next question is, Tim is asking, is there testing for Giardia or crypto in our water, or is that only discovered by reporting by the person getting ill?
Yeah, testing for Giardia and crypto is relatively difficult. It can actually be done, but it usually requires the withdrawal of a very large amount of water, and it's filtered. And in that filter, they take portions of the filter and they can do what's called CIS counts. It's not done on a routine basis for systems. If you have a surface source or a GARP well, your treatment should actually address crypto and Giardia. Again, we're looking for a 3-log reduction for Giardia and crypto. And that actually is a great replacement. If you are looking for basically novel species of crypto, yeah, you could use filtration to capture those novel species. If you were looking at just monitoring your source to see ultimately there how much crypto and Giardia is present, you could do that analysis. But if you think about it there, it's what's called temporal and spatial timing of samples. There may or may not be a plume coming through while you're taking that test. We accept that Giardia and crypto are present in our surface water, and we try and treat for it. Ultimately there, you're better off spending your money on treatment than some very expensive analysis for Giardia and crypto, unless, of course, you're trying to do some pilot testing of a new technology or innovative technology. That's usually done in conjunction with the drink water officer, and they'll provide some specific parameters for that. Giardia and crypto can also be looked at in GARP analysis, and again, they withdraw a very large amount of water, and they put that plate count and other things, the water itself, the sample under a microscope, and see what they can see, Giardia or cryptocis. That's actually actively used to see what type of filtration the soils are providing.
But we largely rely on indicator organisms, right? So total coliform, fecal, and E. coli. So
right. The guidelines actually do identify the fact that looking for specific pathogens is relatively hard. So we're relying on indicator organisms is always the best way. If you're looking at a source, though, take a look at changes in your source. Do you have sudden plumes of turbidity coming through the source? Do you have other hazards on the landscape? Let's pretend you've got cattle pasture above your landscape there, or your catchment for your intake. Take a look at those things, and you can basically do a visual assessment and determine that your risk is either increasing or decreasing based on what you're seeing on your landscape and with changes in your water quality.
What is the appropriate advisory for planned work on a water system where chlorination is temporarily paused, let's say for less than 36 hours? And this question is
okay. Yeah, if this is a surface source where you have a pause in treatment, then a boil water advisory would be appropriate. And of course, you'll need to do testing of that system to determine that the repair you've done or the change you've made has not introduced any indicator organisms or pathogens. So plan for more than 36 hours and less. You can get the lab to do a fast turnaround. That usually is quite expensive. If it's a chemical issue whereby which you're treating for a specific chemical, talk to your drinking water officer. You might be required to put on a water quality advisory, or if the chemical is at a level that is extremely dangerous, you might be required to put on a do not consume for your system. But again, talk well in advance of the project to your drinking water officer to develop a plan.
Are there any guidelines for what information you need to know to sit your EOCP level 1 exam? On the EOCP website, it doesn't really give you information on what you should know.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, so I would actually contact the EOCP and talk to the staff directly and ask basically what are the requirements for sitting the exam. And then there are exam preparatory courses that can actually be taken to help you be successful with your exam. That's really what you should be taking a look at as a person who wants to become a water operator. There is a book that you could purchase called a WEF book, which leads you through a series of test questions. They may not be the test questions on the exam, but it does prompt your knowledge to see whether you've absorbed the material that you've been trying to learn as a water operator.
Since we're, Rob, since we're kind of having trouble with the connectivity, there's a question, will we be posting the Q&A coming out of this presentation? So definitely we will be posting the entire presentation within a few hours, and then we can look at posting the questions and the answers as well. So
okay.
Our next question is, with known aquifers, are there calculations made on the amount of water that can be safely drawn from the geographical area? And the question is by Michael.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, usually that comes in the form, well, yes and no. It can come in the form of what's called a water balance model. Not all aquifers have a water balance model. What I would do actually is there's a body within British Columbia called Groundwater Protection Officers. They work for Ministry of Forests. Chat with the Groundwater Protection Officer with regards to your aquifer, and they can help determine as to whether there is an actual safe withdrawal level for your aquifer. Your water license largely is associated with your withdrawal from the aquifer and how much can you withdraw safely without causing a negative effect on your what are called priority licenses. These are licenses, people who have licenses ahead of you or from the environment itself, what's called EFN, environmental flow needs. And I would talk to a groundwater protection officer with regards to withdrawal rates from your aquifer. If there is not a water balance model there, it may take additional work done by a qualified professional, that's a groundwater hydrologist, in order to determine what a safe withdrawal looks like.
This is a question from Carl. I'm a small operator on Galliano Island, mostly residential systems. I rely on my equipment supplier for water softener type treatment tank specification and programming based on water test reports. They have a chemist experienced in treatment on staff. Are there courses I can take to learn more of this assessment and design knowledge for myself? The interplay of factors is complicated, and I struggle to find answers and information that I need specific to treatment tanks. And basically, they're doing manganese treatment, and they have a green sun filter.
Okay, yeah. Courses. I'm not actually aware of a course that you can take with regards to that, but however, there should be an operating manual associated with your system. If there isn't, get in touch with the actual designer for the system, as well as perhaps the manufacturer. The designer can be very helpful with regards to troubleshooting for the operation of the system. Green sand filters are relatively common in the province of BC. They do a number of different things to polish water, remove arsenic, remove manganese. But again, I'm not aware of a specific course for green sand filters and optimization for green sand filters. You might actually have to contact, as I said, what's called a qualified professional, that being a designer and or a water operator who's very familiar with green sand filters. So specific courses, unfortunately, I can't help you there.
Rob, TRU offers those courses, and
okay.
We can definitely help with those courses and information. So please get in touch with us.
Thank you, Satwinder.
Okay, I'm just waiting for the questions to be posted. So next question, what would be the typical time frame to put a treatment system in place? This is a question from Randall.
Yeah, so Randall, with regards to putting a treatment system in place, it's a process. And of course, it's a project there. There is no typical time frame for putting a system in place. You may have conditions on permit which identify a time in which you must have a system commissioned, but I'm not aware of a typical time frame. Now, treatment, ranges from small forms of treatment that could be installed with relative ease because there's ample parts and or it's a relatively simple design, to complex systems. So if you have conditions on permit that specify a particular period or particular time period in which treatment must be installed, talk to your drinking water officer, explain to them where you're at with your project, how you're progressing, and ultimately what your anticipated time frame is. And those conditions could actually, that timeline could be adjusted. Really what they're looking for is progress. They're looking for the fact that you're actually moving towards getting treatment for that system. Time frame wise, it's almost impossible to predict that, particularly nowadays. As you know, things are delayed. Parts can be hard to come by at times for specific models of treatment, whatever you're looking at there. So give yourself lots of time there.
Would changing a pump system require a construction permit? Cheryl asks.
Yeah, Cheryl, it can. Often what you need to do is just contact the public health engineer in your local area and talk about what you want to do. They may require a construction permit. They have the power to waive the need for a construction permit and often will if you're replacing like for like. In other words, you're replacing one pump with the exact same pump. If you are looking at new equipment, often they will require a construction permit.
Question from Tamara. Why are there so few drinking water officers and environmental health officers? I live in the East Kootenays, and it seems like they're constantly moving on, and so there is a challenge with continuity of support and in getting any response support to begin with. How does a small water operator best deal with this, especially when we are required to involve them on upgrades, water notices, etc., but may also be working on a tight timeline?
Yeah, I do appreciate the issue there, Tamara. There are only a few drinking water officers in the province, actually, within every health authority, and a few environmental health officers. That's a really good question. That's a resourcing question. I can't actually answer why we have so few, because I don't control those larger budgets that come from our senior government. But at the end of the day, if you live within the boundaries of Interior Health, we have what's called the duty EHO. And the duty HO can be contacted. You should have that contact information within your emergency response plan. If not, reach out directly to me and I'll get you in touch with the right person. With regards to your project there, the reality is that just continue to contact us and we'll provide direction. The turnaround for the duty EHO, duty environmental health officer, when we're trying to help water suppliers is actually relatively fast. If indeed you ask a question, we will answer the question. If it comes down to a point where we have to provide direction, like we need some additional information, we will reach out and ask. I will tell you what information we need in order to help you. For other health regions, contact your drinking water officer directly or the main office for the drinking water officer. And that will allow you to get in touch with a drinking water officer or whoever is covering the region in which you are living in and where you have your water supply.
Is there an existing database or method for certified operators to offer services or potential help, even process discussions or suggestions to other systems or operators in British Columbia? This would be a great resource. And that's a question from Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan, I need you to hang on tight and wait, because come end of March, the Online Help Center will actually have something that will allow water suppliers to basically talk to each other and connect with each other via the form of a marketplace. So if you have a service that you're offering, you could actually put it on the marketplace. There are other services out there that could help. BCWWA right now is offering service which helps to connect water suppliers. And you would register for that with BCWWA. With regards to help and reciprocal agreements, you may want to actually just get in touch with your neighboring water suppliers. Don't know who your neighboring water suppliers are? If you live within Interior Health, check the Drinking Water for Everyone website. That'll give you a list of neighboring water suppliers. But otherwise, talk to your drinking water officer or the local regional government, who often carries a list of water suppliers, because they in turn need to know about water supplies during emergency events. And that'll be helpful in connecting you with other water suppliers.
We have posted the link to EOCP criteria for your water treatment certifications. So that is in the chat for everyone to see. And we have a question from Tim. I live on the East Shore and wonder who my closest drinking water officer is.
Unfortunately, Tim, I need you to get a little bit more specific. If you're talking within the Kootenays of Kootenay Lake there, East Shore, the drinking water officer would be Jennifer Marcotte, who is in Castlegar. But again, if you're within Interior Health, you can contact the duty environmental health officer, who can be of immediate help if the local environmental health officer or drink water officer is not in the office at the time.
Yes, it is the East Shore of Kootenay Lake, Rob.
Right. And so that would be Jennifer. And Tim, just get in touch with me directly. It's robert.bertels@interiorhealth.ca, and I can direct you to Jennifer.
I believe that's all the questions we have. Last question from Juliet. Is there an approved technology list for achieving 4-log treatment targets? How are new technologies to the market assessed for ability to achieve compliance?
No, that's a really good question, actually. So as far as a list of technologies is concerned that achieve 4-log reduction, yeah. And new technologies, definitely. For small water suppliers who have lower flows, you'd want to check out nsf.org, National Safety Foundation.org, water treatment devices, and they have a drop-down menu which asks for which reduction claim are you looking at, and in that particular one, you would tag viruses because you're looking for a 4-log reduction. This is an American site. It'll list every manufacturer who provides a device that does a 4-log reduction. Having said that, though, if you have a system that is of larger flows, you would have to contact a qualified individual. That's the designer or an engineer to design a system that would meet that log reduction component there. Now, viruses are interesting. In most instances, chlorine will address viruses. So in injecting chlorine into your system, you need to know where to inject it. You need to understand what the contact time is. There's calculations around that. And ultimately there, you have to understand basically at what level, how much chlorine do you need to put into your system in order to achieve contact. So, but technologies are changing, right? Keep on watching that nsf.org site. But as I said, for viruses, largely you are looking at chlorination of the system.
Tom is asking how are CEUs for this webinar attained? Tom, you will automatically in your email receive the CEUs for attending this webinar, and then you can submit those CEUs to EOCP to make sure that you get those CEUs that are awarded. And each of these webinars is 0.1 CEUs. Okay. I believe that is the end of all our questions. I just want to remind all the participants our next webinar coming up, which is Tuesday, February 28, 2023 at 11 a.m. to 12:30. And the title of that webinar is Groundwater and Wells Legislation and an overview for well owners and well operators. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar on February 28. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Rob, for that wonderful presentation and answering all those questions. They were very helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. If you have questions, just send it to the Online Help Center and we'll do our best to answer your questions for you. Thank you.
Yes. And I remind all the participants to, if they can complete the survey that's on the Online Help Center website. Thank you.